Hey you. So I know in this time there are many of us who are having trouble sleeping, including myself. And one of my favorite memories of my child when she was young is reading to her to help her go to sleep. I love reading, I love being read to. So I'm reading stories for all the little people who may be having trouble sleeping and all the big people who may be having trouble sleeping and all the big people with little people inside, like myself, may be having trouble. In this time, maybe you're worried. Um, Maybe you have concerns about what's happening in the world. Maybe you have loved ones who are sick. And maybe you're not feeling too well yourself. That's okay. Now it's time for sleep. So tonight's story is How the First Letter Was Written by Rudyard Kipling. And I did not discover this story until I found it and read it to my daughter. And it's a treasure. You'll know why. How the first letter was written. Once upon a most early time was a Neolithic man. He was neither a Jute nor an Angle, or even a Dravidian, which he might well have been, O best beloved, but never mind why. He was a primitive, and he lived cavily in a cave, and he wore very few clothes, and he couldn't read, and he couldn't write, and he didn't want to, and except when he was hungry, he was quite happy. His name was Tagumi Bapsali, and that means man who does not put his foot forward in a hurry. But we, O best beloved, will call him Tagumi for short. And his wife's name was Teshume Tawindro, and that means lady who asks a very many questions. But we, O best beloved, will call her Teshume for short. And his little girl daughter's name was Tefmaya Matulami, and that means small person without any manners who ought to be spanked. But I'm going to call her Taffy. And she was Tagumai Bapsali's best beloved and her own mommy's best beloved. And she was not spanked half as much as would be good for her. And they were all three very happy. As soon as Taffy could run about, she went everywhere with her daddy Tagumai, and sometimes they would not come home to the cave until they were very hungry. And then Deshumai Tawindro would say, "Where in the world have you two been to get so shockingly dirty? Really, my Tagumai, you're no better than my Taffy." Now attend and listen. One day, Tagumai Bupsale went down to the beaver swamp to the Wagai River to spear carpfish for dinner, and Taffy went too. Tagumai's spear was made out of wood, with shark's teeth at the end, and before he had caught any fish at all, he accidentally broke it clean across by jabbing it down too hard on the bottom of the river. They were miles and miles away from home. Of course, they had their lunch with them in a little bag, and Tagumai had forgotten to bring any extra spears. "Here's a pretty kettle of fish," said Tagumai. "It will take me half a day to mend this." "There's your big black spear at home," said Taffy. "Let me run back to the cave and ask Mummy to give it to me." "It's too far for your little fat legs," said Tagumai. "Besides, you might fall into the beaver swamp and be drowned. You must make the best of a bad job." He sat down and took out a little leather mindy bag full of reindeer sinews and strips of leather and lumps of beeswax and resin, and he began to mend his spear. Taffy sat down too, with her toes in her water and her chin in her hand, and thought very hard. Then she said, "I say, Daddy, it's an awful nuisance that you and I don't know how to write, isn't it? Then we could send a message for the new spear. Taffy, said Tugumai, how often have I told you not to use slang? Awful isn't a pretty word. It would be a convenience, now that you mention it, if we could ride home. Just then, a stranger man came along the river, but he belonged to a far tribe, the Tawaras, and he did not understand a word of Tugumai's language. He stood on the bank and smiled at Taffy because he had a little girl daughter of his own at home. Tugumai drew a hank of deer sinews from his mendie bag and began to mend his spear. Come here, said Taffy. Do you know where my mommy lives? And the stranger man said, being, as you know, a Tawara. Silly, said Taffy, and she stamped her foot because she saw a shoal of very big carp going down the river just when her daddy would have used his spear. Don't bother grown-ups, said Tugumai, so busy with his spear mending he didn't turn around. I aren't, said Taffy. I only want him to do what I want him to do, and he won't understand. Then don't bother me, said Tugumai, and he went on pulling and straining at the deer sinews with his mouth full of loose ends. The stranger man, genuine Tawara he was, sat down on the grass, and Taffy showed him what her daddy was doing. The stranger man thought, this is a very wonderful child. She stamps her foot at me and she makes a face. She must be the daughter of a noble chief who is so great that he won't take any notice of me. So he smiled more politely than ever. Now, said Taffy, I want you to go to my mommy, because your legs are longer than mine and you won't fall into the beaver swamp, and ask for Daddy's other spear, the one with the black handle that hangs over our fireplace. The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, thought, well, this is a very wonderful child. She waves her arms and she shouts at me, but I don't understand a word of what she says. But if I don't do what she wants, I greatly fear the haughty chief, man who turns his back on callers, will be angry. He got up and he twisted a big flat piece of bark off a birch tree and he gave it to Taffy. He did this, best beloved, to show that his heart was white as the birch bark, and that he meant no harm. Taffy didn't quite understand. Oh, said she, now I see you want my mommy's living address. Of course I can't write, but I can draw pictures if I have anything sharp to scratch with. Please lend me the shark's tooth off your necklace. The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, didn't say anything, so Taffy put out her little hand and pulled at the beautiful bead and seed and shark tooth necklace around his neck. The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, thought, this is a very, very, very wonderful child. The shark's tooth on my necklace is a magic shark's tooth. I was always told that if anybody touched it without my leave, they would immediately swell up and burst. This child does not swell up and burst, and this important chief, man who attends strictly to his business, who has not yet taken any notice of me, doesn't seem to be afraid that she'll swell up and burst. I'd better be more polite. So he gave Taffy the shark's tooth, and she lay down flat on her tummy with her legs in the air, like some people on the drawing room floor when they want to draw pictures. And she said, Now I'll draw you some beautiful pictures. You can look over my shoulder, but you mustn't joggle. First, I'll draw Daddy fishing. It isn't very like him, but Mummy will know because I've drawn his spear all broken. Well, now I'll draw the other spear that he wants, the black-handled spear. It looks as if it were sticking in Daddy's back. But that's just because the shark tooth slipped and this piece of bark isn't big enough. That's the spear I want you to fetch. So I'll draw a picture of myself explaining it to you. My hair doesn't stand up like a drawing, but it's easier to draw that way. Now I'll draw you. I think you're really nice, but I can't make you pretty in the picture, so you mustn't be offended. Are you offended? The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, smiled. He thought, there must be a big battle going on to be fought somewhere, and this extraordinary child who takes my magic shark's tooth, but who does not swell up or burst, is telling me to call all the great chief's tribe to help him. He is a great chief, or wouldn't notice me. Look, said Taffy, drawing very hard and rather scratchy. Now I've drawn you, and I've put the spear that Daddy wants into your hand just to remind you that you're to bring it. Now I'll show you how to find Mommy's living address. You go along until you come to 2 trees. Those are the trees. And then you go over a hill. That's the hill. And then you come to the beaver swamp, all full of beavers. I haven't put in all the beavers because I can't draw beavers. But I've drawn their heads, and that's all you'll see of them when you cross the swamp. Mind you don't fall in. Then our cave is beyond the beaver swamp. It isn't as high as the hills, really, but I can't draw things very small. That's my mommy outside. She's beautiful. She's the most beautifulest mommy there ever was, and she won't be offended when she sees I've drawn her so plain. She'll be pleased in me because I can draw. Now, in case you forget, I've drawn the spear that Daddy wants outside the cave. It's inside, really, but you show the picture to my mummy and she'll give it to you, because I know she'll be so pleased to see you. Isn't it a beautiful picture? And do you quite understand, or should I explain it to you again? The stranger man, and he was a Tawara, looked at the picture and nodded very hard. He said to himself, if I do not fetch this great chief's tribe to help him, he will be slain by his enemies, which are coming up on all sides around him. Now I see why the great chief pretended not to notice me. He feared that his enemies were hiding in the bushes and would see him and deliver a message to me. Therefore he turned his back and let the wise and wonderful child draw the terrible picture, showing me his difficulties. I will away and get help for him from his tribe. He did not even ask Taffy the road, but raced off into the bushes like the wind with the birch bark in his hand, and Taffy sat down most pleased. Now this is the picture that Taffy had drawn for him. What have you been doing, Taffy? Said Tugumai. He had mended his spear and was carefully waving to and fro. It's a little arrangement of my own, Daddy dear. said Taffy. If you won't ask me questions, you'll know all about it in a little time, and you'll be surprised. You don't know how surprised you'll be, Daddy. Promise you'll be surprised? Very well, said Tugumai, and went on fishing. The stranger man, did you know he was Tuara? Hurried away with the picture and ran for some miles, till quite by accident he found Tashumai with Terwindro at the door of her cave, talking to some other Neolithic ladies who had come in to a primitive lunch. Taffy was very like Tashumai, especially about the upper part of her face and her eyes, so that the stranger man, always a pure Tuara, smiled politely and handed Tashumai the birch bark. He'd run so hard that he panted and his legs were scratched with brambles, but still he tried to be polite. As soon as Tashumai saw the picture, she screamed like anything and flew at the stranger man. The other Neolithic ladies at once knocked him down and sat on him in a long line of 6 while Tashumai pulled his hair. It's as plain as the nose on this stranger man's face, she said. He has stuck my Tugumai all full of spears and frightened poor Taffy that her hair stands on end. And not contented with that, he brings us this horrible picture of what it was done. Look. She showed the picture to all the Neolithic ladies sitting patiently on the stranger man. Here is my Tugumai with his arm broken. Here's a spear sticking in his back. Here's a man with a spear ready to throw. Here's another man throwing a spear from a cave. And here are a whole pack of people. They were Taffy's beaters, but they did look rather like people. Coming up behind Tugumai. Isn't it shocking? Most shocking, said the Neolithic ladies, and they filled the stranger man's hair with mud, at which he was surprised, and they beat upon the reverberating tribal drums and called together all the chiefs of the tribe of Tugumai with their hetmans and dolmans, all the Nuguses, wounds, and ashundas of the organization, in addition to the warlocks, Anjikos, Juju men, Ponzas, and the rest, who decided that before they chopped off the stranger man's head, he should instantly lead them down the river and show them where he had hidden poor Taffy. By this time, the stranger man, in spite of being a Tuara, was really annoyed. They'd filled his hair quite solid with mud. They'd rolled him up and down on knobbly pebbles. They'd sat on him in a line of 6. They had thumped him and bumped him until he could hardly breathe, and though he did not understand their language, he was almost sure that the names the Neolithic ladies called him were not ladylike. However, he said nothing until the tribe of Tugumai were all assembled, and then he led him back to the bank of the Wagari River, and there they found Taffy making daisy chains, and Tugumai carefully spearing small carp with his minty spear. Well, you have been quick, said Taffy. But why did you bring so many people? Daddy dear, this is my surprise. Are you surprised, Daddy? Very, said Tugumai. But it's ruined all my fishing for the day. Why, the whole dear, nice, clean, quiet tribe is here, Taffy. And so they were. First of all walked Tashumai Terwindro and the Neolithic ladies, tightly holding on to the stranger man whose hair was full of mud, although he was a Tuara. Behind them came the head chief, the vice chief, the deputy and assistant chief, all armed to the upper teeth, the hetmans and heads of hundreds, platoffs with their platoons, and dolmans with their detachments, wounds, neguses, and akuns, ranking in the rear, still armed to the teeth. Behind them was the tribe in hierarchical order, from owners of 4 caves, one for each season, a private reindeer run, and 2 salmon leaps, to feudal and protagonist aliens, semi-entitled to half a bear skin of winter nights, 7 yards from the fire, and adscript serfs holding the reversion of a scraped marrow bone under Harriet. Those beautiful words, O best beloved. They were all there, prancing and shouting, and they frightened every fish for 20 miles. And Tugumai thanked them in fluid Neolithic oration. Then Teshumai Tewindro ran down and kissed and hugged Taffy very much indeed. But the head chief of the tribe of Tugumai took Tugumai by the top-knot feathers and shook him severely. Explain, 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 cried all the tribe of Tugumai. Goodness sakes alive, said Tugumai, let go of my topknot. Can't a man break his carp spear without the whole countryside descending upon him? You are very interfering people. I don't believe you brought my daddy's black-handled spear at all, said Taffy. And what are you doing to my nice stranger man? They were thumping him by 2s and 3s and 10s until his eyes turned round and round. He could only gasp and point at Taffy. Where are the bad people who speared you, my darling? Said Teshumai Tewindro. There weren't any, said Tugumai. My only visitor was this poor fellow you're trying to choke. Aren't you well? Are you ill, O tribe of Tugumai? He came with a horrible picture, said the head chief. A picture that showed you were full of spears. Perhaps I'd better explain that I gave him the picture, said Taffy. But she did not feel quite comfy. You, said the tribe of Tugumai altogether. Small person with no manners who ought to be spanked. You? Taffy, dear, I'm afraid we're in for a little trouble, said her daddy. He put his arm round her, so she didn't care. Explain, 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 said the head chief of the tribe of Tugumai, and he hopped on his foot. Well, I wanted the stranger man to fetch Daddy's spear, so I drawed it, said Taffy. There wasn't lots of spears. There was only one spear. I drawed it 3 times to make sure. I couldn't help looking as if it stuck into Daddy's head. There wasn't room on the birch bark. And all those things Mummy called bad people are my beavers. I drawed them to show him the way through the swamp, and I drawed Mommy at the mouth of the cave looking pleased, because he's a nice stranger man, and I think you are the stupidest people in the world, said Taffy. He's a very nice man. Why would you fill his hair with mud? Wash him. Nobody said anything for a long time. The head chief laughed, and the stranger man, for he was at least a Tawara, laughed, and then Takumi laughed and fell flat down on the bank, and the tribe laughed and laughed more and louder. The only people who did not laugh were Teshumai Tewindro and all the Neolithic ladies. They were very polite to their husbands and said, "Idiot," every so often. Then the head chief of the tribe of Tugumai cried and said and sang, "Oh, small person without any manners who should be spanked, you've hit upon a great invention." I didn't intend to. I only wanted Daddy's black-handled spear, said Taffy. Never mind. It is a great invention. And someday men will call it writing. At present it is only pictures. And as we have seen today, pictures are not always properly understood. But a time will come, O babe of Tagumai, when we shall make letters, all 26 of them, and when we shall be able to read as well as to write. And then we shall always say exactly what we mean without any mistakes. Let the Neolithic ladies wash the mud out of the stranger's hair. I shall be glad of that, said Taffy, because, after all, even though you've brought every single spear in the tribe of Taguma, you've forgotten my daddy's black-handled spear. Then the head chief cried and said and sang, Taffy dear, the next time you write a picture letter, you'd better send a man who can speak our language with it to explain what it means. I don't mind it myself, because I'm a head chief, but it's very bad for the rest of the tribe of Tukubai, and, as you can see, it surprises the stranger. Then they adopted the stranger man, a genuine Tuara of Tuara, into the tribe of Tugumai, because he was a gentleman, and he didn't make a fuss about the mud that the Neolithic ladies had put into his hair. But from that day to this, and I suppose it is all Taffy's fault, very few little girls have ever liked learning to read or write. Most of them prefer to draw pictures and play about with their daddies, just like Taffy. I love you. Sleepy time. Good night.